This is St. Mark's Cemetery in Vienna. In December 1791, they came here to bury a young man who had died in great poverty. And only the fog and the grave digger were witnesses when the cheap coffin was tossed into a nameless grave. The man was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Later, the Viennese put up this simple and beautiful gravestone near where it was presumed Mozart lies. Amadeus, loved by the gods, but those whom the gods love, they gather quickly to themselves. This is Vienna 10 years earlier, in 1781. In the shadow of St. Stephan's Cathedral, there stands the ancient palace of the Teutonic Knights. Staying there was the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg, Hieronymus Colloredo, with his huge retinue of servants, among them Mozart. Relations between the haughty Archbishop and his hot-headed young composer were already strained. Despite his father Leopold's anguished protests from Salzburg, Mozart had decided to leave the Archbishop's service. An appalling interview with Colloredo brought things to a head. Throughout, he addressed Mozart in the third person, as if he had been a kitchen skivvy.
He called me a lout, a clot, a fool. Oh, I don't want to write you all of it. Finally, my blood began to boil, and I said, "So your grace is not satisfied with me?" He, "What? He threatens me? He, that lout? Oh, that lout? There's the door. Does he see it? I won't deal with such a miserable brat." And I said, "Nor I with you." He, "Then go." And I, as I left, "We shall stick to it. You shall have it in writing from me tomorrow." Instead of Count Arco accepting my petition or getting an audience for me, or, well, to put it in a nutshell, that means that Salzburg is no longer for me, unless I find a good opportunity to kick Count Arco in his ass, even if it happens right on the street.
And so Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was kicked down the stairs, out of the Archbishop's service and into immortality. This is the courtyard of the Deutsch Ordenshaus, the Order of Teutonic Knights, where Mozart landed after he'd been kicked down the stairs by Graf Arco. It put him in a very special position in music history, you see, because he was the first composer to try to make a living without any ecclesiastical or aristocratic patron. Haydn had his Prince Esterhazy, and even old Sebastian Bach was responsible to the city fathers of Leipzig for his job at the St. Thomas School and the St. Thomas Church. But Mozart thought he could exist as a freelance composer. Well, he had his freedom, but as we shall see, he paid a very high price for it. He moved from the Deutsch Ordenshaus to lodgings in the Petersplatz. In the past weeks before his dismissal, he had already secured many friends among the Viennese, and he now began a spectacular career as a pianist cum composer. He played violin, too, in quartets, and he soon had pupils from fashionable society. In the salons of the great palaces of the Austrian nobility, Mozart contributed to the glittering elegance of 18th century Vienna. In that house on the Petersplatz, Mozart was living with friends of his friends, not his father's friends, the Webers, cousins of the composer Carl Maria von Weber, who wasn't yet born then. Now, when Mozart had gone to Paris a few years before, in 1778, he had stopped in Mannheim and fallen in love with Aloysia Weber, a brilliant coloratura soprano. And when he returned from Paris, waiting to find his happy Aloysia, he found Aloysia, but Aloysia had lost complete interest in him. Meanwhile, the Webers had moved to Vienna, and Mozart was living with them, and Mozart proceeded promptly to fall in love with Constanze, who was the next daughter. Leopold, who had foamed at the mouth when he heard about Mozart wanting to marry Aloysia, was equally prejudiced against Constanze, whom he never met in his life. It was in the summer of this year that Mozart was commissioned to write his first Viennese opera, Die Entführung aus dem Serail, The Elopement from the Seraglio. Not surprisingly, perhaps, the heroine was called Constanze. Despite Leopold's bitter and continuing opposition, Wolfgang married his Constanze here in St. Stephan's Cathedral on the 4th of August 1782, and he loved her dearly all the rest of his life.
For some time, we have been going together to attend Mass and confess and take communion, and I found that I never prayed so fervently or confessed or took communion so devoutly as by her side, and she felt the same. In short, we are made for each other, and God, who orders all things and consequently has ordained this too, will not forsake us. We thank you most humbly for your fatherly blessing.
This is the Judenplatz, the square of the Jews, and as its name tells you, it was once part of the former ghetto. But of course, when Mozart came to live here in the late autumn of 1783, after he returned from Salzburg, the ghetto had long since disappeared. And this was the view that he had from his window. Subscribers flocked to his concerts. Leopold Mozart paid a return visit to his son early in 1785. In a letter to his daughter, he describes Mozart's enormous popularity and affluence at this time.
Last Friday evening at 6 o'clock we went to his first subscription concert, where there was an elegant and very numerous company. It took place at the Mailgrove. The concert was wonderful. I was 2 boxes away from the beautiful Princess of Württemberg, and I could hear all the interplay of the various instruments so clearly that there were tears of joy in my eyes. When your brother left the stage, the emperor with his hat in his hand leaned over his box and shouted, "Bravo, Mozart." Your brother made 559 gulden in this concert. Everyday concerts, always music being studied, copied, played. Your brother's big fortepiano has been dragged out of here at least 12 times since I have been here, to the theater or to another house. I think my son, if he has no debts, could bank 2,000 gulden.
Here, in this flat right there, very comfortable it was too, Mozart wrote possibly the most famous opera in the world's history, Le Nozze di Figaro, Marriage of Figaro. And it was here too that Leopold, Mozart's father, came to visit him in 1785. And during that visit there was the famous quartet party where Mozart played Haydn, his elder friend, the new quartets that he'd written for him and which he subsequently dedicated to him. And after they were finished, Haydn got up from the sofa and he went to Leopold Mozart and he said, I tell you before God and as an honest man that your son is the greatest composer I know, either personally or by reputation. And somehow this house is symbolic of the happiest time of Mozart's life. And the Viennese today even call it the Figaro House. On 1st May 1786, all the roads in Vienna led to the Michaelerplatz, where carriage after carriage deposited the flower of Viennese aristocracy at the Burgtheater for the premiere of Le Nozze di Figaro. Figaro was a brilliant success. At the third performance, some numbers were repeated, a duettino thrice. The Emperor Joseph II had to give orders to stop all arias from being encored. But Figaro was also the beginning of that slight aura of scandal which gradually began to surround and engulf Mozart. You see, Beaumarchais' comedy, Le Mariage de Figaro, was a hot political piece at that time. The play had been forbidden by the court census, in fact. The great librettist Lorenzo Da Ponte was himself a famous debauchee and carried with him his own aura of scandal. The alliance of Da Ponte and Mozart was, of course, crucial to the development of opera, but fatal to Mozart's social reputation. Vienna is still a city much given to scandal-mongering, and every Da Ponte libretto caused a furore. The Viennese newspapers wrote about Figaro, "What you can't say nowadays, you can hear sung." The aristocracy were getting slightly nervous about Mozart. After all, Figaro lampooned them. Count Zinzendorf, a typically vacuous representative of the Austrian nobility, wrote at one of the performances, "Mozart's music strange and without purpose." This declining popularity affected Mozart in a very basic way. Fewer subscribers, fewer concerts, less money. Acceptance of the fact of death becomes an increasingly frequent theme in Mozart's life, a theme fostered perhaps by his ardent membership in the Brotherhood of Freemasons. In Freemasonry, too, he sought refuge from a society that was beginning to close its doors on him. great period of the piano concerto was over. Mozart found he could no longer organize subscription concerts as before. There was one last triumph awaiting him. In October 1787, he set off for his beloved Prague.
Voi stonati amici cari, ciò che spendo i miei denari, io mi voglio divertir. Le porrello presto in tavola, son papissimo a servir, son papissimo a servir. Ciò che spendo i miei denari, io mi voglio divertir. Voi suonate amici cari, già che spendo i miei denari, io mi voglio divertir, io mi voglio divertir.
Don Giovanni was what one would call today a smash hit. Casanova, who happened to be in Prague, was very interested and made a few suggestions of a technical nature to the librettist Da Ponte. Prague would have loved Mozart to stay forever, but only an imperial capital could provide that potential revenue he so desperately needed. So far, he had managed to survive as a freelance composer and pianist, but now he was ready to compromise and looked for a regular source of income. On 1st December 1787, the Emperor Joseph II finally engaged Mozart as his Hofkapellmeister, but it soon turned out that Mozart's official duties for the court consisted only in writing dance music for the official court balls, which were held right here in the Judenplatz. By 1788, Mozart was sinking into debt, and he was never a very good manager of his own affairs anyway. Opera performances brought him in very little, and there were fewer and fewer aristocratic piano pupils. If he earned 100 gulden, he'd probably spend 150. In April, the composer announced a subscription for his new series of string quintets, but a little later he was forced to announce publicly,
Since the number of subscribers is still very small, I'm forced to postpone the delivery of my 3 quintets till the 1st January 1789.
He was now forced to beg for money. Here he writes to his good friend, the banker Michael Puchberg, also a Freemason, by the way.
Dear and best friend, my God, I'm in a position that I wouldn't even wish on my worst enemy. And if you, dear friend and brother, desert me, then I and my poor sick wife and child are lost, and through no fault of our own. But I must tell you that despite my appalling situation, I decided to give subscription concerts here, and not even that is possible. Fate is, alas, but only in Vienna, so against me that I can't make money even if I want to. I sent a list round for a fortnight, and back it came with one single name on it, Sweden. Now it's entirely up to you whether you can and will lend me 500 gulden, dear friend. Dear God, I almost can't bring myself to send this letter, but I must. The misfortune is only temporary. Good will win out when the misfortune is past. Adieu. Forgive me, for God's sake, forgive me, please, and adieu.
And on almost every letter, Puchberg would write, answered, and sent 200 gulden. It now seemed as if Haydn and Puchberg were Mozart's only friends.
I invite you, but just you, for a little opera rehearsal at my place, 10 o'clock. I've invited only you and Haydn.
Così fan tutte, performed in 1790, was not a political scandal, but it certainly must have been a social scandal because it made at least a fashionable, elegant thing out of wife swapping. Many, too many, found the new opera frivolous and cynical. Conservative opera audiences were obviously disturbed by Mozart's violently sensuous and richly orchestrated music. In August 1790, Così was withdrawn from the repertoire and not performed again in the composer's lifetime. Shortly after the premiere of Così fan tutte, the Emperor Joseph II died. He'd been critical of Mozart at times, but in a sense loyal to him as well. His successor, Leopold II, was, on the contrary, deeply suspicious of the composer, and any hopes of regaining favor with the court must have gone forever. True to type, the imperial court boycotted Mozart's concert at the Frankfurt coronation of Leopold, and in the next year did their best to sabotage the new coronation opera, La Clemenza di Tito, by arriving an hour too late for the first performance in Prague. The Empress said of the opera, "È una porcheria tedesca," a German swinishness. By 1791, Mozart was deeply, indeed inextricably, in debt. He was borrowing sums like 1,000 gulden, which was Haydn's yearly pension from the Esterházys. This page from one of his sketchbooks tells the whole story. Musical ideas have been swamped by a series of frantic financial calculations. It's hardly surprising that, despite the success of the Magic Flute, Mozart was falling prey to hysteria and despair. A mysterious stranger commissioned a Requiem, and though in fact the stranger was only the servant of a count who wished to pass off the work as his own, Mozart was terrified. He talked constantly of death. All the anguish of his life came out during a carriage ride one autumn day in the Prater with Constanze.
Someone is poisoning me with aqua tofana. I feel a great pain in my loins. One of my enemies has succeeded in giving me poison, and they've already calculated the exact time of my death. I'm writing that Requiem for myself, but I don't want to die. Life is so dear to me.
By November 1791, he was really very ill. Soon, his hands and his feet became so swollen that he could barely move. Time and again, he fainted. They put him to bed. Constanze's sister, Sophie, remembered the end like a nightmare.
Ah, God, how shocked I was when my sister, half desperate but trying to keep herself under control, met me and said, "Thank God you are here, dear Sophie. Last night he was so sick that I thought he wouldn't live to see the day. Do please stay here, because if he's that bad again, he'll die this night. Go and see how he is." I tried to pull myself together and went to his bedside, and he called to me, "Ah, dear Sophie, good that you are here. You must stay here tonight. You must see me die." I tried to make myself strong and talk him out of it, but he said to me, "I've already the taste of death in my mouth." Süssmayr was at Mozart's bedside. The well-known Requiem was on the bedspread, and Mozart was explaining to him how he ought to finish it after his death. The doctor closet was looked for all over till they found him in the theater, but he had to wait till the piece was over, and then he came and ordered cold compresses to be put on Mozart's feverish brow, and this provided such a shock that he did not regain consciousness again till he died. The last thing he did was to imitate the kettle drums in his Requiem. I can hear that even now.
He died 55 minutes after midnight on the 5th of December, 1791. Constanze crawled into his bed and put her arms around him in the hopes of catching the dread fever herself. The next day, his remains were blessed at the Crucifix Capella on the north side of St. Stephan's Cathedral. It was damp and foggy. There was almost nobody there, and Mozart's body finally went unescorted through the streets to a pauper's grave in St. Mark's Cemetery. Later, all the gravedigger could remember was that he lay somewhere near a flowering bush.